hour trying to work out what to do.
Why don't you go to the App Store?
Time and keep trying.
Why don't you go to the App Store?
The App Store.
I tried that.
And it wasn't in the App Store.
WhatsApp, WhatsApp desktop is wonderful, but yes, your phone needs to be running WhatsApp as well.
Yes, I've got to hold the phone up to the tablet to transfer it. That's why Brenda gave me her old phone, because I don't have a smartphone.
Right.
Thank you. By the way, Liz has just asked something.
Okay, let me get.
Can you ask Julian if he knows if you can use Freedom Pass from 8 AM on the bus?
I have no idea. Wait a minute.
Right.
I'll just have a quick look here.
Where's my Zoom gone?
Use your Freedom Pass between 9:30 and 23 o'clock.
Is that on buses as well? 23 o'clock, you can't use it after that.
That's what it says.
Well, not that we're going anywhere.
There you go. There's a curfew for people over a certain age, you see.
Oh, it says here you can. No, this is an old one.
The Freedom Pass.
Temporary changes.
Oh, temporary changes.
What's more about the bus?
I know. Wait a minute.
Open look like.
You used to be able to use the Freedom Pass on the underground and the buses at any time. But
this is COVID-19.
Only after 9:30.
Oh, it's 9:30 now. Yes.
It's all 9:30 for everything now.
For a Freedom Pass.
Yeah, but I mean for buses and undergrounds as well.
I don't think so. I think if you pay, you can go anytime.
Yes, but the Freedom Pass.
9:30.
Yeah, for buses and underground as well as trains.
Every transport.
Yeah. Because it used to just be the trains.
Well, that's what I gather. I think it's to give the people that have to go to work priority.
Yeah.
That's all us old ones get on and block it all off for everybody else.
Yeah.
They can only have limited numbers on the buses and things.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going very far. Anybody been to Westfield at all on the tube?
No.
I've got to go on Thursday. I'm doing a plasma donation in Stratford. I was thinking of driving.
Oh yes, we haven't been.
I'm banned from public transport by my girls.
We're banned by our children as well. Our children.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're the children now.
It's not so bad for you though, because you've got a car.
Yeah, I know.
I'm limited to what I can walk to.
I think there's too many young people in Westfield. I think we ought to lock the young people up. Let the old ones
That's a good idea.
That
would be a very good idea.
They're the ones that are spreading it.
They're the ones who are being silly, yes.
Okay, we'll start in a minute. Right. Okay, so hopefully we won't get cut off. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so this week's subject is Ekev. Well, we'll see what it contains. Okay, Iris, over to you. Can you see that, or is it too small?
It's very small, but I'll see if I can. Still a bit small.
Yes. Okay.
But I can read it just about.
Okay, well, 1 second. Let me do this. Let me just very quickly make it slightly larger. Okay, 1 second. Just give me a moment. Just keep chatting for a sec. We'll split it.
Oh, Michael's come on.
Hello, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Cool.
Hello, Michael.
I didn't realise this was going on, so I just joined.
No problem. You haven't missed anything yet. Okay, right. How are you enjoying your holiday? How are you enjoying your holidays?
Good. I'm just
good.
I'm just using my laptop all day long.
Okay, don't forget to occasionally take your eyes off the screen. Oh, I can't talk actually. I spend too much time. Right, here we go. Okay, there. 1 second. Come on. That's a bit bigger. There you go. Is that better?
Oh, that's better
Yeah.
because
Right.
I can enlarge it better. Yeah, that's it. That's fine.
Okay, so off you go.
Right. Moses continues his closing address to the children of Israel, promising them that if they will fulfill the commandments, mitzvot, of the Torah, they will prosper in the land they're about to conquer and settle, in keeping with God's promise to their forefathers. Moses also rebukes them for their failings in their first generation as a people, recalling their worship of the golden calf, the rebellion of Korach, the sin of the spies, their angering of God at Tavera, Massa, and Kivrot Hatava, the graves of lust. You've been rebellious against God, he says to them, since the day I knew you. But he also speaks of God's forgiveness of their sins and the second tablets which God inscribed and gave to them following their repentance. Their 40 years in the desert, says Moses to the people, during which God sustained them with daily manna from heaven, was to teach them that man does not live on bread alone, but by the utterance of God's mouth does man live.
All right.
Moses
next one.
describes the land they're about to enter as flowing with milk and honey, blessed with the 7 kinds, wheat, barley, grapevines, figs, pomegranates, olive oil, and dates, and as the place that is the focus of God's providence of his world. He commands them to destroy the idols of the land's former masters, and to beware lest they become haughty and begin to believe that my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. A key passage in our Parsha is the 2nd chapter of the Shema, which repeats the fundamental mitzvot enumerated in the Shema's 1st chapter, and describes the rewards of fulfilling God's commandments and the adverse results, famine and exile, of their neglect. It is also the source of the precept of prayer and includes a reference to the resurrection of the dead in the Messianic age.
Why? Why the
I don't know, because she obviously wants to see other friends as well.
Sorry.
Right. Okay. So, what do we have there? The land is flowing milk and honey. The 7 species, right?
I'm putting up information already. I'm taking it out.
This business of kochi va'otzim yadi, this is an interesting one, right? It warns us. This is a very contemporary issue in terms of how we understand, for example, sometimes one of the tensions that exists in Israel over sort of, if you like, the hashkafa of things is that people say, oh, well, you know, we need a strong army. And people say, that's fine, but you need belief in God as well. So it's not a contradiction.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I have to be muted. Could you just mute me?
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were. Right, okay. Right. Making the mistake of thinking that it's all down to us and not with divine help. And the 2nd paragraph of Shema, which talks about reward and punishment. We're going to talk about listening today. So the 2nd paragraph of Shema starts off, V'haya im shemo tishma'u, if you will surely listen. Let's have a look. Okay, so there's a great story which I probably told before. I don't remember where I saw it originally, but about this. She was an Asian girl in the American sense, which Chinese girl, whatever. Anyway, she that's not relevant particularly to the story, but her English wasn't so good, and she married this very eminent consultant. I think he was in the States, and I think there was an age gap there. I don't know exactly the situation, but anyway, and they were going to some, fancy dinner for the whatever institute of whatever consultant surgeons he was. And she says, darling, I'm going to feel so lost. I won't know what to say. He says, don't worry. He says, everyone you meet, just ask them, what's your name and what's your speciality? So she spent the whole evening basically going up to eminent surgeons and consultants saying, hi, what's your name? What's your speciality? At the end of the evening, everyone came up to him and said, what an interesting wife you have. Fascinating girl. Absolutely fascinating. Because everyone likes to talk about themselves. So we're all very good at talking. We're not so good at listening. So the most fundamental thing in the Jewish liturgy is the Shema. Shema means to listen, to hear. Let's have a look at some of this. And it's interesting. Somebody once said a colleague of mine once brought up an issue on our rabbi's forum, and I said, I hear you, which to me just means I hear what you're saying. He said, whenever people say I hear you, it basically means I'm not really paying any attention. It's like, we'll take your comments on board. So I didn't think that was totally fair comment, but it's interesting because we use different phrases. We talk about hearing a lot in Judaism. We're going to come back to that. In English, we talk, I think we covered this recently, we talk a lot about seeing. I see what you mean. They had the foresight, they had the vision, right? We use the metaphor of sight. But in Torah, we often use the metaphor of hearing, interestingly. Shema appears 92 times in different forms in the book of Devarim, right? It appears at the beginning of the prayer of the Shema. It's a little bit hard to translate. Anyone want to try to translate the word Shema?
Listen.
Yeah. Are
Hear.
you all listening carefully? Okay. What else? To hear. It's often translated as to obey, to pay heed to something, right? You need to listen to your parents doesn't just mean you need to open your ears to them. It means you need to do what they say. Shema Yisrael, listen is more than is listen up, pay attention, pay heed, take notice. It's not easy to translate. That's the problem with language when you start trying to translate things. Nachas doesn't translate very well. But the Shema and the idea of Shema is very simple. We can't see God, but we're always hearing God. Even though that's also a human quality. The whole Torah is full of people hearing God. Occasionally God appears. God appeared to Moshe, but more often than not, it's God spoke, or they heard the voice of God. We'll see a few examples of that. Let's see. 1 second. Sorry.
What are you doing?
Before we do that. I think these are in the wrong order. Sorry. Yeah, they're in the wrong order. Right. So let's have a look at this, right? Who wants to read that number 3, which should be number 2? This
I'll do
is
it if you like.
last week's. Yeah.
Yes. The Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but perceived no shape, nothing but a voice.
Right. Very crucial that you heard, but you didn't see. You can't see God, but you did hear. You heard him. Right. It's always about hearing the voice of God. We talk a lot about the voice of God. Okay. Coming up next week, Ra'eh, who would like to read number 2, which should be number 3. Any volunteers? Go on. Yeah.
See, this day I set before you blessings and curse. Blessings if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, that I enjoin upon you this day. And curse if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn away from the path that I enjoin upon you this day, and follow other gods whom you have not experienced.
Okay. Now in the Hebrew it says, see, interesting, see, actually, Ra'eh, I placed before you. Can everyone see my little mouse cursor there? How do I do this? Oh, spotlight. 1 second. There we go. No, it's not working.
I can't see this.
Okay, 1 second. 1 second.
Thing.
Oh, why is it not working? I don't know why it's not working. That's
Maybe
annoying.
Stop sharing and reshare.
No. 1 second. Yeah, maybe I'll try that. Just give me a moment. See if that helps. Let's try again. Will that help me? Oh, here we go. Sorry, right. That's why. Okay, there we go. Right. See that little spotlight there?
No.
So
I still don't.
Yes.
you don't see my red.
A red spot.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Oh wait, yeah, I do.
So the Hebrew says, "Esa bracha," the blessing, "Asher tishma'u," if you will listen to my mitzvot. And then later on it says the curse, "Im lo sishma'u," if you don't listen. Here it translates it as obey, right? So Shema, probably obey is quite a good translation. Follow, right? So it's not just listening and hearing; it's taking note. So even when we mention sight, see, says Moshe, look, he then talks about hearing. So like we said, in English, we talk about insight, hindsight, foresight, vision, perception, right? How you perceive things is how you see it. But in Hebrew, we don't do that. We talk about hearing. I heard, I hear, I listen, I comprehend. It's all connected to hearing rather than to sight, interestingly. Very different from English. If anyone's familiar with the Talmud, I didn't put these examples on the screen, but in the Talmud, the phrase we use for learning is also often related to hearing. So, for example, if you want to say in Aramaic, here's a proof, it doesn't say come and see, it says come and hear, tashema. An inference in the Talmud, it will say, if you want to say we learn something from here, it will say shema mina, we hear from this, we listen from this. When someone disagrees, they say lo shemiale, I didn't hear that personally. I'm not hearing that. That's not how I'm understanding it.
Should I print it?
No, are you asking me something? No. Right. When
No,
we talk,
sorry, it's just my mum in the background.
okay, I'm just going to mute you again. Unmute if you need to ask something, okay? So when we talk about understanding, when we talk about the Torah, we often say something that was from Sinai or was an oral tradition. We say oral, right? That was spoken, Mipia Shemua, from what we heard. So we always talk about hearing and listening rather than sight. So it's very different from English. English is all about sight, the metaphor of sight. Hebrew is about the metaphor of hearing. And in general, we know that the whole metaphor of speech, and obviously the corollary to speech is hearing and listening, right? You've got 5 senses. You've got talking, you've got listening. I guess they complement each other. Zoom's doing quite well today. Yesterday I had a couple of different Zoom things, and I don't know if anyone else had this experience on Zoom yesterday. The sync was off, the synchronization. It was an absolute nightmare because you couldn't see when the person was talking because it was like a badly dubbed foreign movie. And basically, at the best of times, it's hard to have a conversation on Zoom because you have to try to not interrupt the other person because then it cancels out. But it was really hard. So hearing and talking are not always exactly complementary, especially if everyone talks at once. But anyway, it's about hearing. The closest word to obeying is to shema, to listen, to hear, to listen carefully. So Judaism is very much about listening. Right? When you speak, you communicate with others. When you listen, others obviously communicate with you. Right? You can do things by sight, and obviously some people have to do things by sight, sign language, etc. Charades. But there's some playing charades is all with no words, right? Miming. But there is something special about, there's something more communicative about verbal communication, okay? Verbal communication is more communicative. Now, it's interesting. I don't know if anyone else has found this. When I do my podcasts, when I record them, and some of you have done them, and some of you are, please God, we'll get around to doing one with everyone. I'm not missing anyone out deliberately, trying to do as many people as I can. Got the Benders coming up. We've done various members of the Rainsbury family. So often the internet's not always so good, and we want it to be good quality audio. So often what we'll do is switch off the video, and it's just a phone conversation over Zoom. And actually, sometimes people say, it's quite refreshing. I'm so used to being on screen, seeing all the time. It's quite nice to go back to the old-fashioned telephone. We actually managed 3 months of davening with Howard on the phone. We couldn't see him, but we could hear him. Do you know what? It worked perfectly fine, actually. And before video and whatever, people were making phone calls for years, and it worked fine. And they somehow picked up the nuances without the body language. It's interesting how things change. So Judaism,
a bit crackly at times, but
okay, but that can happen on Zoom as well. But that's not related to the issue of seeing or not seeing, yeah? Yeah? Agreed? That's a technical problem. That could happen now with Zoom as well. So now, if we look at the second paragraph of Shema, hopefully it will come up now on screen if I've done this right. No. 1 second. Oh, sorry. 1 second. I've got some of my things are out of order here. Sorry about this.
messy office. How about that?
Okay. What is the Shema, right? What is Shema? So the Shema, is it a prayer? The Shema says to listen. So here's an interesting thing. Let's read the Talmud. Who would like to read? Who hasn't read yet? Michael, you want to read?
No, thanks. I'm just
Okay.
here to listen. And
Okay.
yeah.
Well done. Well spotted. Who's volunteering?
Or spot is what?
We will.
Right, off you.
I'll volunteer.
Mark's going to read.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, even if a person recited only the recitation of Shema, of Shema in the morning and in the evening, he has fulfilled the mitzvah of this Torah scroll. Should not depart from your mouth, and it is prohibited to state this matter in the presence of Ami Haratz, as they are likely to get.
Haaretz means the masses, the proletariat, okay?
As they are likely to get the impression that there is no need to study Torah beyond this. As Rava says, on the contrary, it is a mitzvah to state this matter in the presence of Ami Haratz, as they will realize that if merely reciting the Shema leads to such a great reward, all the more so how great is the reward of those who study Torah all day and night.
Okay, so the Talmud talks about Shema. It's interesting. It says saying Shema is not actually a prayer. It's study of Torah. It says that the Torah scroll should not depart from your mouth, and they said you shouldn't say in front of the masses that you can just say the Shema in the morning and evening and you've ticked the box of learning Torah, because people will think you don't need to study Torah. And Rava said, no, on the contrary, educate people that even just saying the Shema leads to great reward. How much more so than studying Torah all day and night? So what's the point here? The point is about hearing, again, hearing the words of Torah, speaking the words of Torah, hearing the words of Torah. Nowhere does it mention sight.
Read.
And just by the way, a blind person can say the brachas on the Torah when they get called up. I'm not exactly sure how they do it practically, but they can do it. Right? You don't need to be able to see to study Torah. I mean, you might practically need to be able to see the sources. It's interesting. The chief rabbi has very open. He has very, very poor eyesight. If you ever, I don't know if you know this, but he memorizes almost everything, or he'll have a very large print. He's got very poor eyesight. He doesn't drive, and he overcomes it. I mean, he manages to teach and study and so on, but it's very challenging. But so what he does a lot of the time is he'll memorize things, so that it's easier than having to look at very large print. So sight, it's a useful thing to have, definitely. But in Torah, we often talk about hearing words of Torah, speaking words of Torah. Even the Shema itself, the mitzvah of saying the Shema, it's not just to say it because you say this prayer. It's not a prayer. It's reciting and hearing words of Torah. And obviously taking notice of words of Torah as well. Now let's have a look at the second paragraph of Shema, how it starts off. Pam, Julian, would you like to read?
Okay. Or Hebrew or English?
Whichever you want.
I'll do the English then, shall I? If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul, or if you really listen.
Right, let's just explain this. Let's look at the Hebrew. V'haya means, and it shall come to pass. Im is if. Shamo is like Shema. You will listen. Tishma'u is a repetition. It's double. Shamo tishma'u. In Hebrew, when you have double, it's for emphasis. Right? It's a principle of Hebrew language. So in English, you wouldn't say if you will listen, listen. But in Hebrew, if you want to say, for example, last week, I think we had in the Sedra, you will guard these precepts really carefully. It says, Im shamor tishmarun, like shomer, but twice, right? In the Akedah, it says, Ki varech avarechacha, I will surely bless you, right? I will really bless you. So Im shamor tishmu could mean, if you listen to my mitzvot. Im shamor tishmu, why the double? Why not just say, if you will listen, if you will obey my mitzvot? It says, if you will surely, or if you will really listen, not just listen, but really listen. Listen properly. Take it to heart. Obey. So again, it's this use of listening, right? You have to listen to your teacher. You have to listen to your parents. No one ever says you have to see your teacher, see your parents, right? You might say you have to see things from their point of view. When we're talking about obedience, when we're talking about following instructions and commandments and mitzvot, we always talk about listening. So it makes sense that the most fundamental thing we say in Judaism is the Shema. Listen, hear, O Israel. Makes sense. Because that's the metaphor we always use. That's the mode we always use. Right? Vision is far less rated in Judaism. Although interestingly, we talk about the image of God. That's not a visual image, obviously. That's a sort of blueprint that we're created in the image of God. But it's God who talks and listens, right? We say to God, hear our prayers. You don't say see our prayers, yeah? We occasionally say to God, see our suffering. But usually we say, hear our prayers. Answer us, yeah? Answer us. Listen to us. Talk to us. Always to do with speech. The world is created through speech. So hearing and listening, right, and paying attention is always expressed usually through the medium of speech rather than through any other medium. Like I said, in English, people say, I hear you, I hear you. I heard you. Yeah, you don't say, I saw you. You might sometimes, the kids say, oh, did you see what I did? Yes, I saw. Right? Sometimes when you need to see something. But more often than not, certainly in Judaism, we use the metaphor of hearing. Which brings us to the next question, which is one of listening. Right? It's not always easy to be a good listener. It's a skill. There's listening and there's hearing. They're not necessarily the same thing. People say, are you listening? I hear you, yes, but are you actually listening to what's being said? Are you taking it to heart? Is it permeating? These are two different questions. You could say the same thing with seeing as well. When I went to March of Living many years ago, somebody had written in the guest book at Auschwitz. They have a guest book, which sounds funny, but I mean, people write messages. Maybe guest book is the wrong phrase. But they have a book, whatever, book of, I don't know, whatever, a guest book, basically. So somebody wrote, whoever said that seeing is believing never came to this place. And I don't know if that will make sense to anyone unless you've been to Auschwitz. Because I know what it's like now, because there's actually a discussion going on that it's all falling apart and the rather bizarre question of raising money to rebuild Auschwitz. But when I went, it's a very tranquil place. It's these big, I went to boarding school, it's these big buildings. I don't even know if all the barbed wire is there anymore. I think it is, but you see these big bunkhouses. Often it's quite sunny. There's grass. It could be a holiday camp somewhere. It doesn't convey the horror unless you know the story. So I think that's what that person meant. What they meant was even seeing Auschwitz doesn't really give you what you need to understand and to believe, because it only gives you part of the story. I'm assuming that's what they meant, and I'm assuming it was written from a sympathetic point of view. But it was an interesting comment. Now, hearing isn't always the answer either. But we do, right? When you go to court, by and large, when you give evidence, right? When Steven Spielberg did his Shoah project, he recorded people's testimonies. I'm sure there were some pictures, but most of it is oral history, right? When you give evidence at a commission or something, it's oral. You describe it. Yeah, you'll show pictures sometimes. Nowadays, you'll show CCTV, but it's very much about speech and about listening. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will hear from both sides. You will hear from the witnesses. You will hear this. You will hear that. Right? It's not so much about seeing. Yeah. So sight. I'm not knocking sight and perception, but it's interesting that in Torah terms we almost always find reference to hearing. Now we've got fewer sources today, so that's actually the last source there. So when we talk about obedience in Judaism, when we talk about following, we very much use the language of hearing. I didn't realize we were going to be so quick today. There you go. Everyone's been listening. It's 10:30. Any questions or comments, please?
I've got a question on something else, though. Can I ask?
Any questions on this? Oh, by the way, sorry, it's also this week's Sedra starts off, Ekev Tishma'un, if you will listen to my commandments. And again, it doesn't really mean listen, it means follow or obey. Maybe it's a bit euphemistic as well. Hey kids, are you listening to what I'm saying? Yes, Dad. No. That means you have to actually do it. Right? Same thing with God. Yes, Mark. Hi.
All right. Hi. Hello there. I've got a children's Bible from when I was young. Right, and it does the 5 books of Moses, but then it continues. Then it continues on to Joshua,
Right.
Judge, Ruth, first book of
Yes.
Samuel.
Yes.
So why doesn't that occur at the synagogue? Why do we just read the 5 books of Moses?
Right. So the answer to your question is very simply, we do read. Okay. So you've got, just looking. No, I don't have it here. So you've got what we call Tanakh, right? Which is
Tanakh, yeah.
Tanakh. Tanakh is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Torah is the 5 books of the Chumash, right?
Yes.
The so-called Old Testament. Nach is Nevi'im, the books of the prophets. So it's not just the prophets; it's Joshua and Judges, but it's also Isaiah and Ezekiel and all those kind of people like that, right? Jeremiah, and then you have Ketuvim is writings. It's the Psalms, it's the 5 Megillot, it's the Book of Chronicles, I think, and Ezra and Nehemiah and things like that. So we do, because every Haftorah is from the prophets, right? They're reading from the prophets. If you're asking why we don't, instead of giving out a Chumash in Shul, why don't we give out a Tanakh? So 2 comments to make on that. Number one of the tragedies of our education, all of us, almost, in the diaspora, is our lack of knowledge of basic Jewish history, which means the history of Tanakh. So, for example, when you hear the Ehud Barak or Ehud Olmert, how many of us know who Ehud was? Does anyone know who Ehud was? He was a figure. He was a king in Tanakh, right? My son knows this, Ellie, because he's a bit.
Was he the one who died on his toilet?
Yes, I think he was. Wasn't that King Ethelred? No, yes, Ehud. I think he might have been. Something nasty happened to Ehud. I don't think he's on the toilet. See, I don't even know. All these names you come across, these modern names, Hebrew names that Israelis use, like Nir and Omri and I don't know, whatever. They're all names from the Tanakh. Now, Israelis, funnily enough, they may not learn things like laws of Shabbat, and they don't learn enough about the Parsha, and they don't learn enough basic Judaism in the state secular schools. What they do learn is Tanakh. They learn Jewish history, all the places, all the people. So we're actually very ignorant of it, and it's a real shame. And when the missionaries come along and say that it says in Isaiah 53, blah, 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 most of us are blissfully ignorant. And that's why they walk all over us often, because they say, you don't even know yourself. We don't study it enough. It's a real shame. But so actually, it'd be great if we all had a Tanakh in shul and we could read not just the books of the 5 books of Moses, but books of Judges and Kings. And the reason we don't, Mark, is very simple. It's a big book. That's the only reason. It's a big, fat book. As it is the
Rabbi.
Yeah.
When we were in lockdown, and we used to read the Sedra between us. Afterwards, I started, because I've got a Tanakh, so we had one each. Jeff had the other book, and I used to start reading the prophets. I got through Joshua, halfway through the prophet.
It's actually,
it was very good.
It's quite fascinating stuff, and it's all very dramatic. There's lots of,
the Haftorah is in the middle of that, isn't it?
So the Haftorahs are from
That's right. I had to find
selections from those books.
Yeah.
If you ever have time, you could do a lot worse than reading a chapter of Tanakh in English once a day. It's fascinating stuff. Or the era of the Judges.
Some really good stories.
The book of Joshua, you've got all the stories, when the sun stood still and all that kind of stuff. Civil wars that took place. In the book of Judges, basically every generation they anger God and they get told off and they nearly get destroyed, and then they do Teshuvah and then it happens again. A lot of corrupt kings. It's Game of Thrones stuff. It's quite graphic. I think it's basic. I'm ignorant myself of it. I haven't been through Tanakh. I had a share in Liverpool. We went through the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, and we got through Samuel 1. I think it's really interesting stuff. All about David and King Saul and their relationship.
Rabbi, could we maybe have a shear on it?
I think it'd be a very good idea.
Nice.
Yes. So watch this space. It's a good idea. Take some preparation. Watch this space. It's really interesting stuff. It's not halacha and mitzvahs. It's Jewish history, basically. Anyway, so that's the answer to your question, Mark. It would be nice if we all had Tanakh, because then when people are bored during the laning, they might read, but we don't, because it just it's the physical space. I think that's the answer. In Israel, you have the black Koran Tanakh, which is a small black book which says Tanakh on it. and then has a siddur in the back for Shabbos. And in the old days, at least, a lot of people used to use that for davening. So you certainly have all the books. And interestingly, there are places where the Haftorah is read from a scroll. Anyone seen that in Israel at all?
No.
You ever seen it read from a scroll? Okay, there are shuls where they read everything from a scroll, not just the Leaning or the Megillah of Esther, but they'll read the 5 Megillot from a scroll. They'll read the Haftorah from a scroll. So there's 2 types of scroll, I believe. There's one where the Haftorahs are written in order. So in other words, you've got Isaiah 53, and then you've got Jeremiah 2, and then you've got whatever. And the other scenario is that you have a scroll for each book of Tanakh. So you have a scroll for Jeremiah, a scroll for Isaiah, and you basically read from that scroll. Now, obviously, that means you have to prepare the Haftarah without the notes. It's quite challenging. But yeah, we don't get enough of it. Interestingly, a lot of girls' schools, the girls don't do Gemara, they don't do Talmud, they do more Tanakh. But everybody should do it. It's basic stuff. If only that we should know our own, also a lot of Jewish philosophies in there. Like Isaiah is where we learn about Mashiach. You know, the whole virgin birth is based on a mistranslation of the word almanah, which means a elderly lady. So
a young woman.
A
young woman.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah. It's completely mistranslated, right? The whole Michelangelo horns is a mistranslation, as we know.
Translation. Yeah.
This is why we need to have language, basically.
Hello.
Right? For anyone that doesn't know, why? It's not anti-Semitic. He believed that Moshe had horns. Why? Because the Torah says, Ki karan or panei Moshe. There was a Keren. A Keren, anyone knows, what was the old song? We used to sing Cheda Hakin or Merzame, Merzame, it was HaKeren, the horn. A Keren is a horn. The shofar is described sometimes as a Keren. Right? The name Keren means a horn. I don't know why Keren is a horn. But it also means a ray. So Keren means a ray of light. So when the Torah says Ki karan or panei Moshe, there was a ray, there was a horn. It doesn't mean a horn. It means a ray of light. But Michelangelo obviously didn't know, or the Christian scholars didn't know how to translate it. They translated it as a horn, looked up in the dictionary. Oh, Moshe had horns, and he depicted him in that way, not because he was a devil or anything, but because that's what the Torah said. And then, you know, Jews have horns, and it amazes me. But then I guess it shouldn't amaze me because we live in a world where people think all kinds of things about different races. But it amazes me that in 2020, you can seriously have people who actually, you know, you hear these stories that people thought Jews have horns. I mean, I don't know. You ever see a human being with horns? It's a bit strange. Anyway, I don't know. Anyone remember a program called The Longest Hatred that was on ITV about 30 years ago? It was about anti-Semitism. And always remember, they went to this Polish village where there hadn't been a Jew for 40 years. They probably killed them all. And they still have these anti-Semitic like stereotypes, even though they've never seen a Jew. Most people in Arab countries never seen a Jew. Doesn't stop people having stereotype images, unfortunately. So yeah, for all those reasons, you know, Christian ministers learn biblical Hebrew so they can translate the Chumash. You know, for all those reasons, we don't do enough of it. We really, really don't. It's a tragedy. So I think Iris is 100% right. We should have. So please God, on my to-do list, it's getting closer to fruition. Let me just remind myself this actually, is to launch Y3A, Yeshiva of the Third Age, which would be once a week, probably during the, I think we said one evening, I can't remember, or during the day, to have a few shiurim, like Lady Sem basically, but for the wider community, online, on Zoom. So you just tune in at, I don't know, 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, I have a half-hour share on Jewish law, a half-hour share on the Parsha, half-hour talk about someone's summer holiday in, I don't know, Tunisia, half an hour of, we can do Tanakh also. I've got to get it off the ground. All the other rabbis like the idea. They all said they would volunteer to give shiurim. So I just need Zoom and I need to publicize it. So that is my long dream, if you like, lifelong learning. So now that we're all on Zoom, it could easily happen. So we'll do Tanakh. We'll find, definitely.
Interesting.
I mean, in the meantime, you know, one thing I miss about Ivor and his Haftarahs is he always gives a fascinating synopsis. Jeff's done it a couple of times, I think, as well. We give a synopsis of the Haftarah. I've started putting it in the weekly bulletin. It's fascinating stuff, the Haftarah. We don't give it enough attention. For many of us, it's when we go out, use the bathroom or have a drink or I don't know, whatever we do. Yeah, Pam.
It might be included in that. It might be a good idea to sort of have one session explaining all the different terms like what the Talmud means, what the
Yes.
Torah is, what the Gemara
That's an
means.
Yeah. Back to basics.
Yeah. Yeah.
I put my weekly WhatsApp things on a Friday. I don't really think about it. Oops. 1 second.
Oh, by the way, Rabbi, what was with the sunglasses on Friday?
I've no idea. My kids were playing around. So I started recording. Next thing I've got a hat and sunglasses.
Oh yeah, that was funny.
I got more views for that. Here, we talk about seeing and hearing. Got more views for that than the actual sermon. I thought about doing it like that, but I thought it might be too distracting.
The newsletter out.
But I send out my Friday WhatsApp message and Facebook message, and I got some feedback from someone who said that there's too many Hebrew words in there that people don't understand.
Who's that someone?
It doesn't matter. There's a reason I said someone. It
Not
wasn't
me.
you. No.
No.
But, I mean, it's not a bad thing. But the next 2 weeks, I've tried really hard to translate things. To say afternoon service instead of mincha. I don't know if it makes a difference, but you're right. Terminology. Again, it's language. It's all language, right? If you don't know the language, it's like when you have, the plumber comes around and they start talking about a number 5 this and a number 3 that, or 2. I don't know if anyone play golf here?
Yeah.
Okay. So if people talk about golf, they say number 5 iron. I'm like, what are you talking about? And once you lose someone in conversation, they're not interested anymore. Computer geeks do it. We do it. I don't know. It's the same with Hebrew. It's very easy to do. You just use a phrase and you don't think about it. And most people don't like to say, sorry, what does that mean? We've all had that funny scenario where you'll be at a meeting, someone uses an acronym, you're waiting for someone to tell you what it is. And finally someone says, actually, what is that? And no one knows, But again, it's language, it's hearing and listening and speaking and what have you.
Who's your next podcast with?
My next podcast, which if I finish editing it, will go out. You may have noticed last week we had a problem with the Twitter boycott, and the Facebook boycott. So we skipped 2 days, which is actually a real pain because I'm 2 days behind schedule. And I'm struggling with it. I tried to get them out for 11 o'clock. You may have noticed I'm struggling for those who follow. But anyway, today's, which probably won't come out quite on time. Maybe I'll stop saying 11 o'clock. Just say every day. It's Sally and Phil. So you'll be hearing all about Sally and Phil. I'm just halfway through editing it. There are 1 or 2 things that...
Oh, Sally and Phil. Did you say Sally and Phil?
Sally and Phil, but 1 or 2 things not for publication, which I have to edit. I'll just leave it at that.
What, the one on the Friday night service?
Sorry?
What, the Sally on the Friday night service?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So watch this space for that. If anyone would like to be in one of my podcasts, I would love to speak to you, by the way. We've got Jeff and Brenda booked. We've got Paul booked as well.
Yes, you told us.
Yeah.
I'd love to be in a podcast.
Okay, so just let me write it down. I'm actually think I've got enough to fill up till Yom Tov, which is pretty amazing. But if anyone hasn't done one yet, yeah.
Is there any news about Yom Tov at all? What's going to happen?
No. Did you see the survey that came round?
Yes.
Right, please fill it in.
I didn't get one.
Do you get emails from the shore?
I do, but I didn't get a survey.
Okay, are you familiar with the chat on Zoom? If I put it in the chat, Iris? Will that help?
Okay.
No. Right, I've just put it in the chat. See if you can open that. That's the survey.
Okay, I'll have a go at that after the...
The short answer to Brenda's question is Yom Tov is clearly happening. In what form is a very good question. Look, people making weddings right now don't know what's happening from one day to the next. The rules keep changing. I just saw someone said, are we really going back to school in September? Because things seem to be getting worse again. Assuming nothing changes from now and the rates of infection are the same and the shielding guidance has officially been relaxed and some people are going out and some people are not going out, and assuming the rules are the same for sure and we can fit about 70 or 80 people max with everything opened up, we have no idea, first of all, how many people want to come shore. And then you have for the phenomenon of, for example, Yom Kippur, somebody says, I don't want to go home in the middle of the day. I want to be in shul all day. I don't know if they will because of the mask. So the short answer is what we're trying to do is at least get a rough idea of what numbers are. If the numbers are 80, we're sorted. I mean, it's sad, but we're sorted. If the numbers are 160, we need 2 sittings. If the numbers are 300, we need 4 sittings. That gives you some idea of the nightmare. And then, when do people want to come? And then here's an interesting question. One of my colleagues told me they're doing booking for Shabbat morning. some of their regulars are saying, you know what, I do Shabbos at home, save my seat for someone who won't otherwise experience Shabbos. So do you say first priority should go to those who come to shul every day, who we know are committed, who want to hear shofar, or who live, Iris, for example, live locally, who, you know, are not going to go anywhere else and need the service? Or should priority go to those for whom, if they stay at home, they'll have nothing? Or should it just be first come, first served? Which never works, because then you get someone on the board who forgot to book. And they say, but I've been a member for 100 years, you know. So it's all these nightmares. And I don't know all the answers. We're trying to do a lot of stuff at home. So we're going to offer to lend masaron to people. We're going to try to organize shofar blowings, although logistics of that is a nightmare. I think what it's likely to look like is more than one service. So you might be told, please, can you come for 9 o'clock for a 1.5 hour service on Rosh Hashanah?
Staggering, you mean?
Yeah. And then at 10:30 we'll clean and we'll invite people from 11:15. One of the things that has struck me very hard is present company excluded. The vast majority of people on Rosh Hashanah come around 11 o'clock, because in my mind I've got this picture of the sermon and thinking, oh, people are going to be here for shofar at 10:45. So people get there about 11 and they leave at 12 regardless. So people only come for an hour anyway. So would it be the absolute end of the world? Besides for those that daven properly, and obviously we're all going to struggle with that, myself included, but let's say for the vast majority, would it be the end of the world to have a 1 hour service? They do that anyway. If we actually tuned it a little bit and fine-tuned it, it might actually be better. Instead of they're drifting in and drifting out, we'll say service starts at 11:15, ends at 12:15. Once you're in, you have to stay in, and once we finish, you have to leave. And we will do shofar, we'll do a sermon, we'll do a short musaf. I mean, it's heartbreaking in some ways.
Heartbreaking.
But actually, you know what? People might enjoy it more. I think the problem's going to be the next year. No one's going to want a 3 hour service. I think that's going to be the problem. I think Yom Kippur is different because people have a mindset of being in shul all day. So that's going to be a different challenge.
It'll be hard.
If 100 people say, I want to be in shul all day, Yom Kippur, I live a long way away, I'm going to walk. Well, are you making me drive home? What are we going to say? You know, so I don't know. But what we need to start with is some idea of numbers. So people are going to get phone calls this week and hopefully we'll get some indication. And it will be tragic if only 100 people come, but in some ways it'll be more manageable. And then there's all the kids. You know, even though they've officially said you can have kids now if you're confident, I wouldn't be confident about social. My own kids are not going to be coming for a while, the little ones. Social distancing, you know, not touching stuff, it's a nightmare, absolute nightmare. But then on the other hand, how can you not have kids in shul? So the new reality is very tough. I think for that, we're looking to do something of a Rosh Hashanah afternoon to ask families to come in the afternoon. But again, where's the manpower? Who's going to organize it? And who's cleaning? And, you know, somebody said, you know, people honestly don't think about these things. Somebody said, I'll have a children's service in my house. I said, you can't do that. You can't do that. You know, so it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And for those of us sitting on this screen right now, I think every one of us on this screen right now, if we have to be home for Shabbos Yom Tov, we'll still do Shabbos and Yom Tov. You know, we'll daven, we'll have whatever. It's hard. Jeff and Brenda just said they've been learning the Haftorah together and reading the Haftorah together. It's wonderful. You know, I know Robin and Jeanette are still at home. They're shielding, but they read the Parsha every week. I'm sure all of us do it. I'd like to tell you that I read it every week during lockdown and practiced the learning. I managed some weeks. The bigger challenge is for those for whom, if you don't go to shul, you're not going to do anything. I know that's wrong, and I know we should do Judaism at home, and we've all been talking for months now about lockdown means you do your Yiddishkeit at home, but the reality is people go to shul. I heard a great story, which I'll probably use in one of my sermons, by Groner, who was one of the major rabbis in Melbourne, who died a couple of years ago. So Rabbi Davis told me he went to open a new mikveh in Adelaide, and whatever, I don't know how it came up, but he spoke about the idea of going to shul. So there was a certain gentleman who hadn't been in shul for a few weeks. So the rabbi of the community, wherever this was, phones this guy up and says, can I come round and have a chat, Joe? I haven't seen you for a while. He says, Rabbi, you can come round, but I'm telling you now, we're not discussing why I'm not in shul. I'm not prepared to discuss it. If you're prepared to not discuss it, you're welcome to come round. So the rabbi goes around and he goes into the home, and this guy has an old-fashioned coal fire burning in the furnace. So the rabbi didn't say a word. He took the tongs. He took one of the coals off the fire and placed it on the tile floor near the fireplace. And after a few moments, you can imagine the coal eventually burnt out and the rabbi left. And that was his message. That as long as you're in the fire, where there's warmth and where there's fire burning, then you stay hot. But as soon as you removed from that environment, and I used to say that when I was in yeshiva, you know, that when you leave yeshiva, it's like you cool down. You have to be very hot. You have to be on fire. So that's not to negate anyone who can't make it to shul. But one of the benefits of going to shul is when you're in shul, you're there. You're in the, yeah, that's me. When you're in shul, you're in that environment. You know, you're in a spiritual environment. When you're at home, you have to create it for yourself. It's much easier, unfortunately, to fizzle out. If you have to do it, you have to do it. But there is value in being with other people, dabbling with other people, being in shul. It's a special place, you know. On the other hand, you have to include everybody. It's very tough. It's very tough. I feel a huge burden. That's the truth. You know, normally this time of year would be about sermons and practicing the davening and making sure we finish on time and getting a nice newsletter out and so on, knowing that people will come to shul, organizing the children's service, knowing that people will come to shul. This year, we don't even know that people will come to shul. It's going to be logistics. It's going to be doing things at home. It's going to be getting messages out to people. It's going to be worrying whether people will forget it's even Yom Tov. Will they fast on Yom Kippur if they're home? So many things. You know, we'll manage, but it's a tough one. So there you go. Anyway.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Are you taking a break from the Shia at all?
Yeah, we're done. We're done.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
summer break.
Sorry.
I know what you're
Yes. Are we taking a break? I think probably, where are we now? What is it, the 2nd of August?
3rd, I think.
We'll do next week, and then we might have 2 weeks off after that, I think.
Why is that, Rabbi?
Because I'm going on holiday, but I'm staying home.
Where are you going on holiday?
Oh, right.
To my garden.
Oh, right.
We are officially taking the last 2 weeks of August off. I've got to have a break, basically. And as much as I love doing the shear and things, it means Monday morning is basically occupied. And, yeah, we'll probably have a break.
You need to have a break.
But definitely next week.
We're all going on holiday that time.
Yeah, we have talked about in the past about getting, you know, do we get a sub for 2 weeks? And people say it's not really worth it because you get used to a certain style and whatever. So yeah, we'll probably have a break after next week. We normally have a break after Tisha B'Av, but next week we'll definitely do. And then we'll have a break for 2 weeks.
Holiday in your garden. Enjoy.
Staycation, you know. If you think about it, that's what most people do when they take off work. You stay home, right? By being home, you're off work. It doesn't work for me. But anyway, there we go. But definitely next week, yes. And perhaps we'll have a break after that. Right. Okay, everyone. I'm off to hear the Chief Rabbi again, my regular Monday briefing with the Chief Rabbi. Not just me, the rabbis. Talks just a lot. We had Chris Whitty last week. It was actually really interesting. And it's actually because of that we can now sing outdoors. Because people asked him questions and he went away and said, I'll come back with answers. So it's really interesting. He was quite impressive, actually. I don't know if the government know what they're doing, but he came across as having a pretty good idea of things. I guess it's like in Israel. You know, the military know what they're doing, but the politicians make the decisions. I think it's the same thing here. If we're up to the medical community, the problem is it doesn't sit well with the economy and with, you know, political realities. But there you go. Anyway, so I've got 5 minutes to edit Sally, and then I'm off to the Chief Rabbi. So I will wish everyone a lovely week. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.
Bye.
And don't forget Thursday night, 7:30, Common Sense with Pam and Sally. Is that right?
7:30, yeah.
7:30 Thursday night.
For ladies.
For ladies.
And what about the Zoom we put on the group? What's that for?
So I just shared, it looked interesting. Somebody's doing, Rabbi Dubov's doing a talk about the Kabbalah of benching. It looked interesting. So if you want to join that at 7:30 tonight, you're very welcome to do so. Highly recommend. He's a very good speaker.
You mean 7 p.m.?
What does it say? 7 p.m.? Oh, 7 p.m. then. Whatever I put on there.
Okay.
To be honest, I didn't read it carefully. It looked interesting, so I shared it.
Oh, Rabbi.
The beauty of Zoom is we can be in South London or North London or, Israel.
Where's the camp being held today?
I don't know, because we've got...
Sorry?
Where's the camp going to be being held?
I can't hear you. Where's the?
Camp Ganiti.
What camp?
Rabbi.
Oh, that's Rabbi Bramman. They're doing it in King Solomon. You have to speak to him. They're not online. They're doing it in real life with all kinds of challenges, I have to tell you. Very challenging.
Yeah, if you got him as a contact on WhatsApp, you'll see on
Yes, he puts it on his updates. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
See you later.
Bye,
Pam.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's just-
Bye.
Bye, Pam. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.